So Wildboar Farms, so I started doing the farmer's market, and I was doing the farmer's market for, I think, going on my 3rd year, and the market manager finally said, dude, are you gonna get a name for your farm? You know, it was just under my name or whatever, and there was, you know, Happy Butterfly and Silly Raccoon, and I'm like, I'm gonna name mine after my favorite animal that lives in the hills up above my garden, Wildboar Farms. And at the time, it was actually Wildboar Farms because I was leasing a chunk for tomatoes. I had an apricot orchard, I had cherries, I had, actually, it was a lilac area, so I had multiple little spots. I was just getting into it. I grew up in the Napa Valley. I live there now. It's the most expensive ag land in the United States. I think 13th or 17th most unaffordable city in America. It's beautiful, but I'm kind of stuck there. So that's why I've never actually owned anything. I've always been tempted to, wow, Missouri, that's beautiful for how much? Barn, pasture, water. Oh my God. So if it wasn't for the chiggers and the humidity, I'm just kidding. Okay, so let's do some questions. You got your So you put composted cow manure in your raised bed. In general it is, but then there's a million recipes. What's the, you know, I don't know what your composted cow manure is. It could be 2 years old. It could have sat in a puddle and got anaerobic. In general, it is good as long as it's been turning, it's been aged. It's probably really good. If it's something you've been doing with success, do that. If you're jealous of your neighbors, pick their brain or whatever and find out what they're doing also. And what I've looked around, no matter different stage, different gardens, truly the people that are adding compost, adding manure all the time, they're the people that had a garden spot there for 80 years or something and still growing a beautiful garden. So straw as a mulch, you're probably asking. So I do like mulching, especially once it gets hot. So in the perfect world, you'd probably leave it unmulched until June or so, let the soil get to full temperature or whatever, and then add mulch. So one of the problems, mulch is great, suppresses weeds. You can even put it on earlier if you got warm soil. The sun's not hitting right on, a lot of evaporation's gone. There are bad things. You get a bunch of rain, maybe it keeps it too wet under your plant. You don't ever want to get straw, almost always has inert seeds, weed seeds that you could be adding to your garden. For raised gardens, I wouldn't add straw into my raised bed mix because I'd probably have that almost weed free, and I wouldn't take a chance of the straw carrying seeds with it or whatever. And I would go with whatever. Now, compost is different in each area, and I always say, if you don't make your own, you got to be dedicated to it and do it right. It can be done, and it's a good thing. If not, buy the best quality compost that you can because it's worth it. You know, a whole truckload of organic matter gets broken down into a wheelbarrow two or so, and that's your microbe army, your microbe food. That's like anytime you see a big huge tree, it doesn't have bare dirt all around the surface. It has probably 100 years or more of leaf mulch, which is feeding the microbe army. It's actually feeding itself, self-sustainable. So yeah, feeding the microbes I found is the best. Good quality compost, typically at least a twice a year application. Another thing I'll mention too, it's not always a perfect world. You didn't always hit it just right in your grow area. And also with the containers, there's nothing you're going to put in a 20, 30, even 50-gallon container that's going to hold enough nutrients to get you typically past about 2 months. So kind of skip to watering with a container or raised bed. Ideally what you want to do is water, even if this is your grow environment, you want to water to where the water went all the way to the bottom, a little bit out, but not a lot. If you didn't water all the way to the bottom, you got dry pockets. You're not utilizing all of your area. If you put a bunch of water through your container, your raised bed, you're actually flushing nutrients away. So it's kind of, you want it watered, a little bit out the bottom, but not too much. So with the supplemental fertilizing, I call it the second half supplemental. Typically, you take a container, you put the best soil you can find. After about 2 months, the leaching, the sun, the plant's eating up the nutrients there. Now you're in supplemental fertilizing. I like to use a liquid organic fertilizer. I said I started off chemical fertilizer guy. I'm a true believer in organics. A lot of them are, say, a tablespoon per gallon to mix. I'll go a teaspoon per gallon. That's roughly 1/3 mixture. And if I'm watering this almost every every third or fourth watering, the container, the ground, whatever, I'll use that diluted fertilizer. So what I'm doing is I'm spoon feeding my plant. My plant has nice growth, it continues growth. If you let it fall on its face, it gets anemic. Then you blast it with fertilizer, you get stretched cells, weaknesses, attracting bugs, delayed flowering. So you want it just nice and steady. Slow and steady definitely wins the race in that. So I don't know like what name brands are here, whatever, but again, I would use the usually get what you pay for in compost and in fertilizer or whatever. So liquid just means it's water soluble. You can add it to the pail. You know, you have like a 1 gallon or a 2 gallon pail or whatever, and you add your diluted amount or however much you're using, and then just water your plant with it. It's the easiest way once you're already that far into it. The nutrients is going to be available fairly quickly to your plant that way. You know, you're already more than halfway into the game at this point. There's no time to waste. You need some food now, so to speak.
You were talking about pruning the tomato plants. How far, when do you start pruning? How far up?
Okay, great question. So pruning, when, where, how much? If I'm crowd planting, I can prune every sucker for the rest of its life if I wanted to, only if I'm crowding. Every other plant, the thousands I've planted, I do the same system. I plant 20 to 30% of the plant. I let it grow about a month. Then the suckers are starting to express themselves. So what I do is clean out from the bottom up. This is my plant. The first 4 to 6 suckers off the bottom I prune, and then I let the rest of the plant grow up. And the reason I do that, if I plant the plant and this sucker comes out, it's going to come out and branch 20, 30 times by the time it's here, and you're on your way to growing a tumbleweed, not more of like a cypress tree or an upright bush. So these will just overburden. You got all these short ones coming out here at the bottom of your plant right on the ground, a big mass. You can't see your tomatoes, got a bunch of small branches, small flowers, small fruit. Instead, you clear the first 4 to 6 and let that top produce a big, strong, upright plant from there. Questions?
What's distance between plants?
Distance between plants, great question. If you're pruning them every one, 12 inches. If I was caging them in general, I'd go about 2 feet, 2 to 3 feet. When I plant in the field, I stack them together actually every 16 to 18 inches. And what that does, since there's 3-4 plants in an area this big, and I got the strings in between, that keeps them from loading up with fruit and sagging. If you spread them out like 2 feet, it'll work, but they get full of fruit and then they start to hang down in the plant. So actually I've found cramming them in there just less than 20 inches is typical if you're planting them in a row and you're going for maximum density. You know, you guys actually have a lot more humidity out here too or whatever, maybe a little more of a spread out. But for maximum density, Florida weed, the standard way, all the market gardeners in California, they're about 16, 18 inches apart, 5-foot rows. That gives you over 5,000 plants per acre actually when you're really maximizing.
Yeah, we understand that to maintain the microbes in the soil, once it's built up, you only till like 1.5 to 2 inches. You're planting 6 inches deep. Are you tilling that deep, or are you just opening up the virgin soil?
Okay, it's a good point. You're saying like once you got the microbe army built, you're better off a no-till, maybe scuffing the surface to do the weeds. So that is great for a field application. People in the perfect world, a no-till field would be the best. Initially, most of them have to be deep ripped the first time, and then after you're adding enough annual cover crops and compost things, you'd grow there almost for an eternity and never have a problem again. So what microbes do as they live in the soil over time and you're feeding them, different ones establish different locations. Some like the Bahamas, some like Alaska, so to speak. So when you are disking, you're reshuffling the deck. So out of necessity, in some places I've grown, we had 10 to 28 yards per acre, and then go ahead and disc it in out of necessity. If I had my own plot and I was taking care of it over time and had it dialed in, I would go the system like you said, cover crops grown, top applications of compost, and never going more than 1 inch or 2, and that's just for weed control. You know, once you get, like I said, the perfect story built or whatever written. So yes, and it's better than not. At least you're using organic to till, but in the perfect world, yeah, just surface tilling would be the